Welcome to the Golf Improvement Podcast, episode 212.
Welcome to the podcast for golf lovers who are looking to shoot lower scores. Dedicated to professional club fitting, putting and short game improvement, and effective practice techniques to improve your golf game. This is the Golf Improvement Podcast with your host, Tony Wright.
Hello, this is Tony Wright from Game Improvement Golf in Oak Ridge, Tennessee with the Golf Improvement Podcast, dedicated to sharing useful information on professional club fitting, putting and short game improvement, and effective practice techniques, changing golfers' lives, one golfer at a time. How was I fortunate to find Jason Kuhn's amazing website, Yips Free? I actually don't remember how, but once I read some of the valuable content on it about his personal story and battles with the yips and how he's now having success helping athletes in many sports overcome the yips and create freedom in their sporting lives, I asked him to be on the podcast, and he enthusiastically agreed. I originally recorded this interview with Jason in mid-June, but wasn't able to post it on my site. But now my website update has been completed, and I wanted to be sure as many listeners as possible get the opportunity to listen to this inspiring interview with lots of golf improvement gold in it. So enjoy.
Tony Wright and Game Improvement Golf, changing golfers' lives, one golfer at a time.
Hello, this is Tony Wright with episode 212 of the Golf Improvement Podcast. And it's a real treat today to talk with Jason Kuhn, who's a former Navy SEAL, a D1 baseball player in the past, but importantly for today, someone who has had amazing success helping athletes overcome the yips. And I'll just preface this by it always fascinates me how people have something that happened to them a lot, and they have adversity, right? And the adversity, like in your case, you had adversity you'll talk about, and you overcome it by learning something and really diving in and doing something that helps people be successful because of that happening. And I know you talk about it on some of your website write-ups that, you wouldn't be anywhere different than you are now if you had to choose it in a way, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, absolutely.
It's really neat. Yeah. Well, share a bit of your life story and how you came personally to be interested in the yips and finding effective ways to help people overcome them.
Yeah, sure. Well, I guess it depends on how much time you got, so.
Yeah, a little bit,
Well, the basics is I had the yips. So I was playing baseball in college, played all through high school, played at Tennessee Tech for 2 years, transferred to Middle Tennessee State. As a mid-major there, my junior year, we won our conference in the Sun Belt, had a top 25 ranking. So we were playing at a pretty high level for our capability. And I was one of our main contributors out of the bullpen. I would come into high leverage situations with runners on base or close games. And I would say I was an above average college pitcher, and then turned into a pretty dominant one at the D1 level for a short window. I got a little bigger, stronger, figured out some things mechanically, and had a very realistic shot at the draft. I was not a high round prospect by any means, but I was throwing the baseball very, very, very well. And certainly was going to get an opportunity to play pro ball by all indications until I went out one day and it was as if I had completely lost my ability to throw. I went out in an inter squad. It was the first day I knew something was different, and it was my senior season. So I had already pitched and pitched well at that level. It was an inter squad, so there was no real pressure compared to some of the situations I had been in prior. I didn't feel any elevated nerves or anxiety going into it, but I could not find the strike zone. I wasn't missing the catcher, but I just could not throw a strike to save my life, walk the bases loaded, maybe walked in a run or two until coach just kind of called it for the day. I went out into the outfield by myself and was sitting there because I knew something was off, something was different, but I didn't know what. That was back in 2001, and there was no name Yips or anything like that, and the internet barely existed,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
you couldn't really look this stuff up like you could now. That went into, I tried to fight through it. It continued to get worse. I went out to play catch the next day. About every fourth or fifth throw, I would sail one way over my teammate's head. And then I ended up throwing 6 wild pitches in an inning in a game, which was the most ever in the NCAA, and I believe it still is. And so that was when baseball ended for me, and it was really hard. I was devastated. I was lost, and I was embarrassed. I didn't know what to do. So I tried all the things you're supposed to do. I even tried getting hypnotized. I was against, sports psychology back then, and thought it was for weak-minded people and things.
Yeah.
Um, and in that, nothing that was provided to me really provided any kind of effective solution. I got a little bit better warming up and stuff, but it wouldn't translate over to a game. So, it pretty much just kind of broke me. I got in a real dark place. I started drinking a lot. I couldn't sleep, and
Mm.
so one day I was like, "Hey, man, fighters fight. That's who you are." I grew up tough, so I went out and I threw for 6 hours straight. My plan was I was going to throw until I could again, and I threw until I couldn't move my arm anymore, and I was more inaccurate at the end than I was the beginning, and that's when I just felt defeated. I didn't know how to fight it. People thought I was mentally weak. I didn't feel like I was mentally weak, and that bothered me to my core. So as one day I woke up face down in my hallway, just without direction, without purpose. And I thought to myself, okay, man, this thing happened to you. It is what it is. Is it going to define who and what you're going to be for the rest of your life? And I knew I needed to make a change, but I didn't know what to change because I'd done a lot of things right. I was a decent kid. I worked hard and did the things you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
It wasn't
Yeah.
supposed to happen to me, but um, I had bounced off of every wall from booze to whatever else. And I finally stopped and I looked at two places I had not looked yet. I looked at God and I looked internal. And I was in there. I just didn't know what to do with myself. I was in my dorm room one day having another bad night, and I pushed the bottle of whiskey aside and I just stopped and I prayed for probably the first real prayer I've ever said. And then instead of trying to tell God things, I just tried to connect to my creator. And I just said, I just broke down in tears and said, why, why is this happening? And um, said, I just felt these words come across my heart, not audibly, not visibly, but just on my heart from somewhere other than me. Just wait, something better is coming for you. And I didn't know what that would be at the
Yeah.
time,
Wow.
but I had faith that there was purpose to what I was going through, and that was the key. Is I thought the circumstance had taken my purpose in life. I was supposed to be a ball player. I failed, and now I was destined to drift through life in some lesser existence. So when I stopped viewing the circumstances having taken my purpose, and I started viewing it as having purpose for me to be forged into a more capable person, is what everything changed. And that's what I did. I just said, Jesus, help me. And I had peace and clarity, but I still couldn't throw. And so I looked internal to learn some things about myself. And I realized that the game defined me. I was dependent on baseball for my sense of self-worth. And, I didn't know how to live without it. I was terrified of losing it. And I imploded. And so I decided to become a Navy SEAL for several reasons. 9/11 had just happened. It was a path for redemption for my failure in baseball. But I knew if I went into the Navy, the SEAL teams have an extremely high attrition rate. From 75 to 90% of classes don't make it through. And if I went in with that same mentality, I'd probably get the same results. So I learned that what I do shouldn't define who I am. Who I am should define what I do. And rather than being dependent on success in the profession for my sense of self-worth, allow my intrinsic sense of self-worth to create my success within the profession. Um, and baseball will always be a part of my identity, and the SEAL teams will always be a part of my identity. But the difference was, in baseball, I was dependent on it for who I was. And when I, had this clarity through reflection and prayer, I allowed who I was to create my success. Not allowing what I do to define who I am, but allowing who I am to define what I do. And started focusing on the good things instead of all the bad. Standing my ground and
Yeah.
fighting as a kid, game-winning hits, and thought that is true. You don't need anybody's validation of that. Just be grounded in the truth of it and channel it into service of team and mission. So I did, and it led to the. I think I got up stronger than I got knocked down. It led to becoming a Navy SEAL and had about a decade in special operations. Started working in performance, not in the Yips, just in mental performance and team culture. Been doing that a decade, and then I met Tyler Matzik about gosh, it's been a little while now, 5 or 6 years ago now. Feels like yesterday.
And he was the first one that you worked with. Is that right?
He,
I didn't realize that.
yes, on an official manner, on a professional manner, where I was compensated for it. I had helped guys
Yeah.
kind of pro bono here and there, just offering tidbits of advice, but he was the first one I'd worked with on a professional manner. Yeah.
Wow. Wow. Now, obviously your experiences drove you to start working to understand the yips and cures, but were there any like huge aha moments of different things to do or different advice to people or things like that kind of helped you get there with people like Tyler and other folks that you've worked with?
Yeah, there were.
That
And I
sort
guess
of
to
process.
summarize my kind of longer answer in that first question was, and relating to what you just asked there, was I'd been frustrated with sports psychology. I don't think that it was through bad intention. It was just ineffective for this problem. And I felt when I would go in there, they were telling me what was wrong with me instead of listening to me describe what I was experiencing and helping me develop a solution. And, the first time I ever heard performance anxiety, like you have performance anxiety, I was like, that doesn't sound right. Because as I said, when I went out to throw that day, I didn't feel any elevated level of anxiousness or fear. I felt completely normal, other than the normal amount of nerves you would have before you go out to compete in a game. And so I feel like the anxiety, at least the conscious, rational anxiety that we feel, is a byproduct of the yips, not the cause of it. So they're treating the effect, not the cause itself. And if you don't get to the root cause of it, then you're not going to have a solution that's effective. It can help a little bit. That's where I said I got, where I could play in, I could play catch and warm ups a little bit, but it wouldn't transfer over into a game. So some of the aha moments I would say is one, that this has absolutely nothing to do with mental toughness. So if you're a player out there and you're feeling shame and guilt and questioning your mental fortitude, don't, because I went through Hell Week in the SEAL teams, and it's in my class we had 135 guys start. We got to Hell Week with 43, and we came out of Hell Week with 20, and I was one of them. And it's all about mental fortitude, getting through that week. So I proved at that moment in life that I was extremely mentally tough. Yet I still had the yips when I had a baseball in my hand. So if I still had the yips and had proven that I was mentally tough, then the yips cannot be due to a lack of mental toughness. So
Yeah.
that was a big
Yeah.
thing. And that just helps release the pressure valve. Like, hey, this isn't because I can't handle it, or, can't take the pressure or anything like that. And the other thing was in identity. And it's really hard when you're young. A lot of the players, they're younger when they develop this. And knowing, I think that, as I said earlier, having a dependency on the game for our sense of self-worth, ego, and identity versus valuing it as part of it, and where we place our needs. We want to place we all have a need for affirmation and validation. So it's not like we can't have that at all, but placing it in the right sources. And that was one of the biggest mistakes that I made was, and I don't blame anyone other than myself for my implosion in baseball, and it led to bigger and greater things and complete fulfillment in my life and meaning. And so I'm totally fine with all of it. I wouldn't trade it, as you mentioned in the beginning, but I placed my value and need for affirmation and validation in some sources who loved me for what I did and could provide for them, instead of those who loved me and cared for me because of who I was, regardless of the results that I got. So understand who those people are in your life and place them in the right, place your need of affirmation and validation in the right sources. I think that, there were, what I do doesn't define who I am. Who I am defines what I do. And one of the other biggest aha moments was when we were shooting. So we were on a range shooting a pistol, and it turns out I was really bad at it. I didn't know I was going to be bad at it, but I was. And the reason why, that we're bad at it is because we flinch. You'll hear people say you're jerking the trigger and things like that. It's not really true. What's happening is, when you shoot a gun, especially, and a pistol really pronounces or highlights this because the barrel is really short. With a rifle, you can get away with more mistakes, but the barrel is really short. And so any movement causes the bullet to, that barrel to move, and that short barrel causes the bullet to be off path. So when we teach shooters to shoot, you press the trigger without any rounds in the gun. That's called dry fire. So the gun just goes click. So you learn your grip, your stance, your follow through, and you practice with that gun with no bullets in it. Then you put a live bullet in, you put a magazine in and rack a round home, and you say, do everything the same way. So in your conscious mind, you're saying, hey, do everything the same way that you've just been doing. But what happens is the subconscious correctly perceives that there's a threat. There's going to be a big loud explosion, a big loud noise and an explosion in your hands, and you need to prepare for that. And you tense just a little bit in your forearms, fingers, and hands. Typically, you'll push with your palm and the bullet will go up into the left, or you yank with your fingers. You grip a little tighter as you press the trigger and you yank it down into the right if you're a right-handed shooter. And you tell yourself not to, but you do it anyways. And so as we were doing this and they were explaining this to us, it was like the light was shining down from heaven and my epiphany. I was like, this is exactly what was happening to me in baseball. And it is almost the exact same thing. We press the trigger, the subconscious says, hey, threat, you prepare for that threat, you flinch just a little bit, and it throws the bullet off path. Even though you're telling yourself not to do it, you do it anyways. So we asked them, how do you train yourself to not flinch? If you're telling yourself not to do it and you do it anyways, they said we dry fire 75% more than we shoot with live rounds in the gun. And so that's how I taught myself how to be a good pistol shooter and defeat that flinch, was by dry firing thousands and thousands and thousands of times to train my subconscious that when I press that trigger, nothing happens. That way, when I get in dynamic competitive mode, that's what the automated subconscious part of my brain believes. And so understanding how the brain works in those two capacities was also vital. And I'll break more into that in a bit, but those were probably the biggest things, is having my identity grounded in who I was, knowing who I am, what I wanted, why I wanted it, and not having a dependency on it from external sources. And when we need to gain that, knowing where to place it, and those who love you for who you are, not what you do. Understanding that, you can release the shame, understanding this has nothing to do with mental toughness. I mean, if there's a player out there showing up and battling this and dealing with the embarrassment and the frustration every day, yet still showing up every day, that's mental toughness on display.
Yeah, I love that. When I went back and read your stuff, your things on the Yips free site, and read that, and it just made that resonated with me. Yeah, they're hanging in. They're looking for solutions. They're doing their best to find them, right?
It's an injury. It's just on the inside and you can't see it. I think it's like we pulled a hamstring, but we pulled a muscle in the subconscious part of our brain, and we've got to rehabilitate it. And there's nothing anyone's going to say to you in an office that's going to spark an emotional reaction or a psychological response that's going to solve it. You've got to go train it array. You've got to go rehabilitate it by striking the golf ball or throwing the baseball.
Yeah. I might talk a little bit about what I've been doing, at least since I think you might know I had knee surgery, but I've been practicing putting a little bit and doing it a little more intently. But I do it not with a hole, but with a towel.
Uh-huh.
Okay. So I don't have well, I'm talking about it now, aren't I? I don't have a specific target. I don't let myself get focused on a target, but just work on, what process I'm using for stroking a putt.
Right? You're exactly right. Yep.
Yeah. And I think I got that from reading some of the things that you talk about.
Well, fantastic.
You have some great parts of the Yips free site. When what is the Yips, what causes the Yips, how to beat the Yips. I don't know if there's anything else you want to share right now about the causes that you haven't, because I think you've talked around that a little bit, but if there's anything else in that area. And everybody should go read this part of your website. Anybody that has a Yips shot. It's a very clear description of things.
Yeah, I write better than I speak sometimes. So yipsfree.com, what causes the yips, and there's a lot of detail in there on it. But I think that some of it is basic awareness. The task becomes very simple, and there's a lot riding on it. As we make our way through the ranks of the game that we play, things become expected rather than rewarded. So when you're younger and you make a putt for the first time, or you win around, and dad is like, way to go, Johnny, and that feels really good. Well, it starts to change. I don't speak the golf language as well as I do baseball. So, but you can translate it. Things like throw strikes, get the bunt down, or all those little things that used to bring us joy become something to be expected. And then there's a lot of negative emotion assigned to it when we fail at them. and there's very little positive emotions assigned to them when we succeed at them. And it starts to kind of reverse itself, and the brain develops a defense mechanism. So it's very similar to if I threw a punch at you right now and we were sitting in the room together at your chest unexpectedly for no reason, and I just throw a punch at your chest and you don't have time to get your hands up, you're going to flex your chest muscles and make them tight. You're not going to tell yourself to do it or not to do it. You're just going to do it. That's the body's default response to protect the vital organs when it perceives a threat. So, in the same way, when we're struggling with the yips, the body develops this defense mechanism. It's a subconscious initiation of tension. So, it's involuntary tension, and it engages those muscle groups. It makes them tight, and we can't have the dexterity that we need to get a clean, quality connection with the ball when we putt. And it's if you were to hold a golf club right now and then make your wrists and forearms tight. So there's two muscle groups that run up and down your arms into your hands and fingers. One muscle group's responsible for extending the wrist. One muscle group's responsible for flexing it and making it tight. In order to do movements that require fine dexterity, like throwing a baseball, shooting a free throw, putting, setting in volleyball, so on and so forth, we have to engage the muscle group that's responsible for extension, not flexion. But what's happening is because of that subconscious initiation due to a perceived threat in certain environmental conditions, and that's why some guys can putt in this situation, but not that situation. Okay. A lot of that goes back to prior experiences that they've had. That's another thing that brings it on is anomalies. There's adversity everyone experiences, bad weather, whatever it may be. But then there's the anomalies. Perhaps an abusive coach, perhaps scholarship money threatened to be pulled, perhaps hands-on stuff on and off of the course, all sorts of stuff. And it creates this kind of perfect mix where the body develops this defense mechanism and it says, hey man, protect yourself. And as you go forward, it engages both muscle groups at the same time. So as you try to as you try to connect with the ball on the putt, just like when you press the trigger on the pistol, things get tight and you'll see the club face open up. And if you're right-handed, it'll, you push it off to the right. And then as you try to, you're like, wow, I got to follow through and extend through that. But because your muscles are getting tight, you can't completely. And the only option is the club face wraps around the side. And that's where you put it towards the left or into your feet. Same thing in baseball. It's way high on arm side. They try to follow through and extend it. They wrap around the side, get that slider spin and spike into the feet. But it's not because they're mentally weak, can't handle the situation. It's an involuntary thing. So if you made your hands tight right now and then tried to putt, you'd be like, wow, that feels like the yips. And it feels like the yips because it's exactly what's happening. The only difference is in one situation, you're doing it on purpose. You're doing it voluntary through your conscious mind. And in the other situation, you're doing it involuntary through your subconscious mind. And the reason why it feels like a grab at the end is because everything sometimes people struggle to bring the club face back or whatever else. But as they come forward, that other muscle group engages and then it feels like that grab. So that's what's happening. So once you understand the problem, you got to define the problem correctly before you can have any kind of solution. And I think that's been the biggest miss, again, with respect to some of my colleagues in sports psychology. I think that's where they've been missing the mark the most, is they haven't defined the problem correctly. And if you don't understand it, you can't provide a solution. And it's hard to understand unless you've been through it,
Yeah, for sure. Well, you talked a little bit about Tyler, and I just got to talk a little bit about that particular story. As I'm just thinking here, I mean, to have had the yips and then stand in the pressure situations, right? Or what I would perceive as the pressure situations that he has after he had gotten through what you worked with him on, and then to be able to perform, just incredible.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's incredible. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really cool. I mean, yeah, Tyler's an awesome dude. He did it all. I just shared my experiences and tried to help him any which way I could. But he was the man in the arena. He's the one that went out there and, battled it and did whatever it took. And I mean, he did whatever it took. And I just couldn't be prouder and happier for him. So he was out of baseball completely for 5 years after being a first-round pick and making it up to the big leagues.
And he was a reliever. He was the high pressure guy, come in, solve the problem, blah, blah, blah.
Oh, yeah. They nicknamed, pardon my language, but they nicknamed him Nutsack, right? Because of his ability to come in and get it done in those situations. And was iconic. Almost won the MVP. You know, he was up for MVP, I think, in the World Series and stuff like that. So I couldn't be happier for him. When I met him, so when I work with players on the Yips, we do one of two things. We do the traditional mindset training that I call the fundamentals of winning. That alone won't solve the Yips. We do that with the application processes, how we throw the baseball or strike the ball. And I'll cover some of those on here too as well. But Tyler and I's theories on throwing were right in alignment. And he had already been applying some of the same stuff, some of the stuff you described, basically error-free training there, right? And then building off of that. And so he was throwing the ball pretty decent when I met him. And then, I shared my theories on it and he continued to work on that. Then we worked on the mindset stuff and a bunch of physical training to reinforce the mindset training. And he got back up there and just absolutely killed it. I couldn't be happier for him. I couldn't be prouder of him because he deserves it. He's just a great dude and does great things. And that's that. And it's an incredible story. We went down to the World Series and I looked at my wife and he struck some guys out. I had tears in my eyes. And I said, at the time, I thought the Yips was the worst thing that ever happened to me in college. And at the time it was. I know it's just a game, but it was everything to me. It was my outlet for so many things. And it stripped everything about, that I believed about myself. I was overlooked a lot, and baseball was where I was going to stick it to everybody. And when I imploded in it in such an embarrassing manner, it was really, really hard. But I said, now I think it's the best thing that ever happened to me because having lived the life that I've lived, I'd rather be here watching him pitch in the game than pitch in the game myself. It was fulfilling. And when that's it, man, we're all going to have pain in our lives, but how we respond to it assigns it greater or less meaning. And, we can't remove suffering, but we can suffer well. And I think it was Jordan Peterson said, when you suffer well, you grow in character, and a growth in character makes you more capable, and a more capable person can achieve more. And man, that was just spot on. I couldn't have articulated that back then. And then you turn around and you help someone else with those lessons learned through your pain and experiences, and that provides fulfillment in your lives. And that's the idea. But as far as solutions, we start with dry fire. You take the gun shooting example and you apply it to golf or baseball. So it's basically error-free training, and you remove the outcome. So there's no hole. You just put into a wall or open space and you focus on nothing but feeling connection with the golf ball. And when you feel connection with the golf ball, you reward that feeling and you let it feel good. You assign it very positive emotion and do it as many times as you can without risking injury. And what you're doing there is just rebuilding the foundation of the subconscious trust in that free and fluid action. And then you can't turn off the valve. So when you get out there, you're going to move into what I call the danger zone. It's either a certain distance or it's a certain environmental condition.
I'll tell you what mine is.
Yeah, it's either close or far. Which is it?
Oh, it's far. It's about, what I've been doing is putting 4 balls around the hole, 5 feet and putt, and then 10, and then 15 and 20. Those are not danger zones.
Okay.
30 to 40 feet, somewhere in there, it becomes something where it's not as easy to make the putter move.
Yeah. So what you want to do there, it's not quite as simple, but when you start to feel that tension build up, right? That tingly feeling, you can feel it in your ankles sometimes. What we don't have is a way to turn that off. Okay. Because it's like an adrenaline hit. It's like, it's once it's set in, it's very similar to post-traumatic stress. It's your body is saying, hey, this is an area, an environmental condition that you need to pay attention to due to past experiences of embarrassment or failures or whatever it may be. All those things that are thrown into our pot of soup, right? So because that's coming from the subconscious and the central nervous system, consciously you can be aware of it. I've been that way. I almost drowned once, and then we were jumping out of a helicopter into the ocean a few weeks later, and it's easy. It's not all that dangerous. And I almost drowned off the side of a submarine a few weeks prior, but I didn't. And then the ramp comes down on the helicopter. My central nervous system is lighting off. My heart rate increases. My body starts to get tight. And my face was smiling because I was like, this is ridiculous, dude. As I talk to myself, I'm like, hey, settle down, body. Like, you've done this before. It's not that big of a deal. But what's going on is it's saying, hey, man, the water almost killed you last time. The ocean, the dark ocean at night. And you need to pay attention right now. Okay. So the same thing is happening, or a version of it is happening out on the field. So as I talk to myself, I do the same thing on the field. I just talk to it. I talk to my subconscious as if it's a separate entity. I say, I know you're trying to help me right now, but I trust freedom. and I take a big deep breath
Huh.
in and a deep breath
Yeah.
out. So here's another difference from what I've heard as traditional sports psychology method. I'm not sure. Rather than trying to make it go away or stay zenned out in some other place or remember when you were 12 or something like that, I accept it. I let that tension come right in and flow right out because nothing lasts forever. I just try to speed up the process. If you have an adrenaline hit, 10 minutes later, it's a little bit less. 10 hours later, you go to bed. So I just breathe through it. I think of it flowing right out my fingers, right out my toes, and settling. The wave crashes like on the beach. Let that wave crash, bring it back down to as far as you can get. Then rechannel your mental focus not into making an accurate putt. That is our goal. We're not becoming apathetic to the outcome. That's a bunch of crap. Okay. We're just channeling our focus into the process, the details of the process so that I can produce that outcome. I'm just closing the loop on my thought cycle into the detailed action. The only way to override the subconscious glitch, if you will, is through deep conscious effort right where the mechanical interruption is taking place. So there is
Yeah.
a mechanical interruption, but it's being caused by a subconscious initiation. So I've got to consciously focus on overriding it by being very intentional with the action that I'm going to take. So I tell players generally in golf to feel that club face connect with the ball clean or feel the movement in your shoulders, whatever you like better, wherever that motion is initiated from. Or in baseball, it's feel the seam come off of your finger or your fingers driving through the seams of the baseball, and your whole world is there. You see, it's like check this out. If I asked you to say red apple, yellow banana, green pear, and you repeated that back to me over and over again in that sequence and cycle, okay, and then I started to tell you a story, you would know that I'm talking in the background and telling you a story, but you wouldn't know what the details of it are because your
I'm
mind is
thinking
looped
about
in.
red apple, yellow banana, green pear. Yep, right there.
There you go, right? So now take that, but transfer it to the parts of your swing and your putt. Okay. And so it's like back forward connection or something like that. And you keep your mind locked in. You're closing the loop on your thought cycle and you're not allowing the stressors to penetrate. And as you execute that action, you're going to look up and the ball's probably going to go where it needs to go anyways. And then as you gain success and clean quality connections, the subconscious is going to start to revert back to the way you putted your whole life. It's going to trust that feeling. You're going to reward that clean quality connection with good positive emotion, right? Because you can remember good things that have happened in your life and bad things, but you can't remember what you had for lunch 6 days ago because there's no emotion assigned to it. And the problem with the yips is, as we discussed earlier, there's much negative emotion assigned to bad putts because you're on TV and a bunch of people watching, and then all of a sudden you shank one really badly, and it's extremely embarrassing because you're a human, right? And
Yeah.
and it gets, and then the positive putt, you're like, okay, way to go, jerk. I should have made that anyways. That's how we talk to ourselves sometimes. We're going to reverse that, reward that clean quality connection, flush the bad ones as well as you can. It's not a perfect science. There's always emotions are real, and you can't not have them. Otherwise, we'd have real problems, right? Um,
Yeah.
but learning to manage them in that manner and how to use them in a way that's effective to rehabilitate yourself through this process. And there's several other things too that I go through with players, but I mean that's kind of a good overview and breakdown of and hopefully, because I'm passionate about this. As I said, I had it at end in my baseball career. So sometimes people are like, man, don't put out too much information, protect it. And I just tell people I got a certain set of skills. So if you steal my stuff, you'll have to deal with that, right? But I want to help people.
Well,
I'm joking, but I want to help people.
yeah,
So
yeah.
hopefully this information, will help somebody because it sucks, man. It just sucks to go through this.
Oh, yeah. Now, and I put a question in here about, how long does it take? But it really takes as long as it's going to take for any individual. You can't really tell, really, can you?
No, some
To kind of
indicators.
make your own personal. Yeah.
Yeah, so I would say if you go to a website and it's say, hey, one session and you're solved, $800. I'd say now, man, do whatever you need to do and whatever. But man, it's in my opinion, those are snake oil salesmen because I've never seen it happen. The fastest I've ever seen was a Division I catcher in 5 meetings over 5 weeks, and he was able to get back in games and play generally yips free, and that's the anomaly. That's not the norm. It depends on how long you've been battling it. And because golf is a sport you can play for a really long time, sometimes there's guys that have been battling it for a decade or more. Um, so I think that, and I think that what's on the line too, if it's a guy playing recreational and hasn't been battling it for that long, it can be a quicker solution than say a guy who's playing for money in a career. and has been battling it for 15 years or something. Generally speaking, to answer the question, I tell people it takes about a year to have this completely ironed out. And even then, it's kind of like if you're an alcoholic, you got to work on it the rest of your life. But over time, it gets easier until it's, really simple. But just for me, I threw more wild pitches in the NCAA than anyone else ever has. So it's impossible for me not to have that thought cross my mind when I go out to throw. However, I have the tools to utilize to override it. And the more I utilize those tools and gain success when I throw and play catch with people now, the more that thing becomes just, a small recessed part of my subconscious that I'm able to easily override utilizing my very strong sharpened tools now. And that's where we
Yeah.
want to get to with it.
Yeah. Now, you said you're better at writing than some things, right? But I believe you're going to start working, or maybe you are working on a book, videos, some resources for people. Is that true? What's the?
Yeah,
I
that's
thought
the
I read that
idea.
somewhere.
So, all this came about pretty quickly. And after Tyler Matzik's success, and God bless him, sending a lot of people my way, um, I just got a ton of clients. And so I got really busy. And so the way I'm doing it now is I'm working with players over Zoom and guiding them on what to go do. They come back to me a week later with feedback, and we continue to train. We build upon that both on the mindset training, so the general performance training, and then on the practical solutions of how to strike the golf ball. And so we work through that on Zoom sessions. We record them, and then they're uploaded into a folder, and the player gets to keep those so they can refer back to them any point they want to. And that takes about 14 to 15 meetings to get all the way through it. And so far, so good. The so what I want to do eventually is, yes, write a book, and then I also want to get online training courses where it's not me live, but recreate the quality as well as I can in a virtual session without it me being live there. And anything else I can do, because it's not cheap, and I hate to charge money, but it's how I make a living. And there's only so much time in the day, but it breaks my heart when right now there's almost more players than I can handle, and it's really hard to recreate myself in this training because, as I said, it's I've got some guys that are going through it that I think I'm going to be able to bring on so I can scale it that way to help train other guys once they're done
Yeah.
playing. But a
Yeah.
lot of my players are kept confidential, especially if they're at the amateur level, so they don't get the stigma that's associated with it. And but yeah, I eventually want to create some other materials because it just kills me when I either don't have the time because I'm too booked up, or it's too expensive for someone to be able to afford. And I just hate it because that would have been me back in college too. If there'd have been somebody that could help, I wouldn't have been able to pay for it probably. And
Yeah.
man, I would have done just about anything to be able to do so, So I got to figure it out. But yes, that is the plan.
Well, that's I mean, you'll do it, knowing what I can tell from talking with you and all the things you're doing. It'll happen. It's a matter of kind of working it in with everything else. So
Yeah, I think so. And I'm really excited about it. As I said, it started with team building and working with teams pro bono, people who knew my background. I never had any intention of being a public speaker or even having a public presence. There was a time in my life where I didn't even have a cell phone for about 2 or 3 months. And my wife made me get one. And, but it's turned into this, and I've become more comfortable with social media and speaking. And I speak all the time now to teams, not on the Yips, but on different things. And then the Yips side is just growing about as fast as I can handle it. And it's just really cool how it's all come together. When you're young and you don't know why you're going through something, but you just keep trying to do the next right thing as well as you can, put one foot in front of the other, and develop into something. And it turns into a life you wouldn't trade anyways. And the relationships I developed in the SEAL teams and the experiences that I had were just incredible. And I love those guys. Going back out to see them next week at the reunion. And those experiences taught me things that I could add on to my baseball experiences to give me this unique path to really understand this problem and develop a solution that's effective. Now, the solution's not fast and it's not easy, but it has so far worked every time. So, you know, I don't like to fail, so I don't plan on failing at all.
there you go. As we end, any other particular things you want to share with people? Any other thoughts that maybe you haven't so far?
Yeah, I would just say, I guess, and I'm sorry to get repetitive, but just the biggest thing is having your identity grounded, okay? That what I do doesn't define who I am defines what I do. And placing your value in those who love you for who you are, not what you do. In a sense, let the ego die. And the ego can work in two forms: arrogance, but that's not most people, it's some. But the other one is in that deep need for affirmation and validation. And that's kind of how I was. And as I said, we all have some sense of that. Just try not to have it evolve into a dependency to where you're dependent on the game for your sense of self worth. We all have that need, but place it in those people who love you for who you are, not what you do. If you think about it like this, man, if you're, if you look at Matzik and he comes out as first rounder, and he makes his way quickly up through the ranks into the big leagues, and social media was just being invented at that time, and more people are hopping on the train, then the train crashes. If your train crashed, who's still on the train? Those are the people that you want to confide in, as far as where and who you find your value in. And not social media, not rankings, not ESPN, not any of that. And it's hard in today's world, especially for the kids, because they're being raised in it. It's different. But know who you are,
It's
what you want, why you want it, and be grounded
yeah.
in that, and not have it dependent on external entities. And then the second thing that I would say, the biggest number one thing for me when I taught myself how to throw again, so I taught myself how to throw again during the Navy, and then outside of it, when I started traveling around working with baseball teams, until I can throw now and pitch and have fun. And I really just fell in love with throwing again. And that's what I want for every client that I work with, is not to just become Yips free and be able to play at a competitive level again effectively, where no one can tell they have a problem. I want them to fall in love with what they do again, just like they used to. And you can get there. It just takes time and it takes effort and knowing and having a plan. You see, most things people try is ineffective. So they start to lose faith in everything. It's like, okay, this is just like everything else that I've tried. And so they don't really, the buy-in on it isn't really there, because nothing is out. They've been promised the world and then it doesn't work. And that was another one of my frustrations with, the other methods that I went prior to that too. But the biggest thing for me was, I was at home one day and there was a baseball sitting in our living room at my parents' house, home from a deployment. And there's always a baseball around somewhere. And so I picked it up and I was going to throw it into the recliner, and I was still worried I was going to throw it through the window or the lamp. I'm about 10 feet away. There's really no threat. And I just, man, just feel the seam come off your finger. Just focus on that and nothing but that. And so I did, and the ball had backspin and rotation, and it landed into the recliner, and that felt really good. So I did it a bunch of more times. And then I went outside and it just started throwing into open space, focusing on the release of the ball and then up against the wall. And then I started adding in the environmental stressors gradually. Just like if you pulled that hamstring, you're not going to go sprint 100% and try to change direction in a game, right? You're going to build it up gradually. You go as fast as you can, but only as fast as you can. You find a threshold, an environmental threshold and distance, or whatever it may be. It could be a camera, it could be a certain person. Okay. And then reverse engineer and work back into that threshold. And that's what I help coach guys through, is how to do that and stuff. But have the identity grounded, focus on feeling the connection with the golf ball, on that and nothing but that. It's almost that simple. It's just
How
harder
could
to do
yeah.
than it is to
How
say.
how could anything be more fun to be wanting to have again, is to just have the joy of being able to putt and just totally enjoy it
Well, that's what keeps me
without that.
going,
I mean,
Tony. I see
yeah.
the guys. It's
Yeah.
tough because you see them in the beginning with just desperation, and I've been there, you know. And then by the end of our training, usually, and sometimes it's a year and a half later, man. And like I said, I got video recordings of these guys and text messages, and it's just hard. I can't put a lot of it out publicly because of the NDAs in place and stuff like that, and whatever. But it's just pure joy. And to see someone overcome that and their career continue makes me so incredibly happy. I get
Yeah.
frustrated. It's on a competitive level with the other things that are out there, man. Do whatever you need to do. That if it works for you, it works. It's all under the umbrella of effectiveness, but just be careful. I tell people all the time, if you're going to hire somebody to work with you on the Yips, ask them to describe to you what the Yips is, and determine whether that is consistent with what you're experiencing out there on the golf course. And if it's not, then you're probably not in the right place. And I also ask them how many people that they've worked with and how many of those people have been successful. Because sometimes they'll point to one breakthrough case here or there, which may or may not have been a product of their actual training, right? They may have just kind of figured something out, and it may have been. But how many have you worked with, and how many of those were successful? And by successful, what do you mean by that, right? How was success defined for them? Get that information from them, and then compare it to the others, and then make your choice. And be careful with where you go there, because it's a lot of time and money you're investing.
Oh yeah, and you're investing your heart too.
Well, exactly.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to put links in the show notes to the Yips free site. And again, anybody that, has issues or concerns with a Yips, look at, the write-ups there. What is the Yips? What causes the Yips? How to beat the Yips? You have to read that. But also to your Stonewall Solutions site, which is another end of your life, but also an important one, where you're working with people on focusing on performance and team building. So,
yes, sir. And links to all of those are on the Twitter, Instagram, all those things. I'm not on social media all that much, but I do check it here and there, so you can find me there too.
The Golf Improvement Podcast is sponsored by Tony Wright and Game Improvement Golf. Tony creates exceptional golf clubs. You shoot lower scores.
Jason, thanks for sharing some of the valuable information you've learned to help athletes overcome the yips. It's been fun and helpful to apply some of the things I learned from your site in my practice efforts to be free from the putting yips. One thing you said a number of times, and yes, I wrote this down, was what you do does not define who you are. Who you are defines what you do. Be sure to go to Jason's yipsfree.com website and read some of the links there, like what is the yips, what causes the yips, and how to beat the yips. If you personally have the yips, this information and this interview can help you. Jason also has another website, Stonewall Solutions, that describes his efforts in helping others create elite performance and team building. I have two shout-outs today. First, to Systematic Business Marketing, who've done an amazing job creating my new website. I hope you like it. Second, to Music Radio Creative, who created the new podcast intros and outros you're listening to for the first time. Many, many thanks to both of them. If this podcast and all of my podcasts and blog posts benefit you, remember that there's a Support the Golf Improvement Podcast link in the show notes for this episode. Your continued support is greatly appreciated. Well, that's it for today. I'll be back in 2 to 3 weeks with a new episode with good friend, putter fitting and putting instruction guru, Bruce Rarick, sharing some of his knowledge about the influence of putter shaft flex on your putting performance. Until then, take care, God bless Ukraine, and God bless America.
Game Improvement Golf, changing golfers' lives, one golfer at a time. www.gameimprovementgolf.com